Just a second. We are now recording. Welcome everyone. Today is June 9th, 2020, and we are here with Tom Ryan and Barbara Engelhardt, his wife. I'm Kevin, Tom's son. These are some of Tom's collected memories. In today's topic, I wanted to ask Tom, being the eldest son, and Tom being the eldest son, was it hard being the eldest in the family? Tell us about your two sisters, right?
Right. My parents were married, and it took 7 years before I was born. So it was somewhat of a miracle, my birth. And it was another 7 years before my first sister was born. So I was an only child and a much beloved child, in spite of having all kinds of health problems. They were very excited to have me. So the girls, my two sisters, born way after me, 7 years and 10 years after I was born. They always said Tom's the favorite, and he gets everything, and they love him more than they do us two girls. So they kind of had a bad relationship a lot of times with parents. And I, of course, always had the ideal one. And it kind of reminds me that Dan said once, Kevin's your favorite because he's smart and went to college and got all kinds of degrees and everything. And I said, no, Dan, if anything, I think I never could identify with Kevin. He was way too smart for me, way beyond me. And I identified more with you. Your struggles in learning and so on from the time you were a kid. He says, oh, I didn't know that. So I think kids normally think their parents make choices that they don't, and the parents aren't even aware they've made, I guess.
That's true.
I think I was lucky for me, if it's good to be an only child, and I only was. I mean, I did have two sisters, and even though I was, when my last sister was born, my mother told me, called me in and said, leave your friends outside. I have something to tell you. And she told me that I was going to have a new baby is going to come into our family. And I was all excited. She says, now, you're not supposed to tell anybody. I don't want you running up and down the street saying you're going to have a baby sister or brother. And I said, okay, I swear I won't tell anybody. I was excited. Wow. So my mother's walked back and forth from the house to the grocery store and so on. And the lady down the street, of course, was aware that she was pregnant. And she told her daughter, Mrs. Ryan is pregnant and she's going to have a baby. And so Janet Welch comes running out of the house saying, your mother's going to have a baby. And I went in and told my mom, you said I couldn't tell anybody. And here's Mrs. Welch, who we hardly know, down at the end of the street, and you told her. My mother said, I didn't tell her I was going to have a baby. So I know we got along, the three of us, because I was so much older. We didn't have rivalry, or I don't remember any anyway, except that they always thought I was the favorite because I don't know why. My mother got all excited when I came home from college and so on.
Uh-huh.
So I was treated as the best, I guess.
Sounds good. Thank you. Shall we try another one?
Sure.
Okay. Let's see. Here's another one. Okay. What was your best book in high school that you remember?
I'm a reader, and I've read a lot of books. And in fact, when Barbara and I met, we both confessed that we had read War and Peace, which is a big, thick book, when we were in college, when we were like 20 years old. But when I was in high school, I wasn't a reader. I wasn't really much of a student then. I liked school and did well in it, but it was in college that I got excited about reading and started reading serious books. But I can't even remember a book that I read when I was in high school now. Now I know you and Dan too started reading much younger and reading a lot of books.
Hmm.
But I don't.
Don't remember much from high school as a reading, huh? Yeah.
No.
So what
And
did you
those,
do instead? Play.
well, I had jobs. One thing I had from the time I was 11 years old, I worked at all kinds of anything that paid money and was legal. I would do mow lawns or paper routes, or I had a grocery store clerk. I did just about every job that a high school kid could do, and that took up a lot of my time. I didn't go out for sports,
Uh,
and I did the minimum of work to get pretty good grades in high school, but not. I wasn't an A student by any means. Never
okay.
was.
But kind of on the book theme, I was just wondering, I remember somebody saying that Ray Bradbury grew up down the street or something like that, or in the same neighborhood.
That's right. Now, he grew up in Waukegan, and in his later years, he came to Waukegan, and he went to the Waukegan Library, and he donated all of his research books, his library, to the Waukegan Library. And I think they named the library, named it the Bradbury Library, or at least part of it to him. So he was a favorite. He wrote short stories, science fiction, and he lived in California when he did his writing, but when he was a little kid, he lived in Waukegan, and he remembered us.
Okay.
Jack Benny too was born in Waukegan. He was a comedian on radio. But otherwise, Waukegan is not a big, it isn't a rich suburb. It was an industrial town outside of Chicago. And so it was more of a satellite town to Chicago rather than a suburb.
Wow. Yeah, yeah. So did you do any kind of traveling when you were a kid? In high
Hardly
school?
ever.
No?
My father had a job. He was a postal clerk, and he didn't make a real high salary, but it was a steady job. And so we were very, not poor at all. We always had enough to eat, but there wasn't money left to go on trips. And the only thing we'd do is once or twice in my youth, we went to visit Aunt Edith and Uncle Clarence up in Birchwood, Wisconsin. And they owned a fishing camp. They had cottages, and fishermen would reserve them, come up and fish in the lakes, a whole series of lakes, Birch Lake and so on, that went around their home. And we would go up to visit Aunt Edith and Uncle Clarence, my father's only sister. And that we thought that was a wonderful thing to be able to go on a trip. And we talked about it at home at the dinner table day after day. And my little sister, 10 years younger than I was, she says, "Are we going to go through Germany on the way?" And she thought we were going to the moon or something, the way we were talking about it. So exciting.
Wow.
And we had a car, 1936 Dodge, that had a hard time making it. During the war, you couldn't buy a new car. So going up even to Birchwood was an adventure. You could only drive 45 miles an hour to save gas. And gas was rationed. And we got up there, and it broke once. And we had to stay in Wisconsin Dells for 3 or 4 days while they got the part to fix the car.
Oh.
And we got to go on the boats up and down the Wisconsin River. And that was our big adventure. An Indian jumped from Stand Rock over and beat his drum and whooped and hollered. And they put on a show for us on the Wisconsin River when the Indians lived there. So that was the biggest adventure. I
So
think ever.
The Wisconsin Dells and Birchwood Lake was further up than Wisconsin Dells. Uh,
Right, about twice as far. That was about halfway to Wisconsin Dells. The Wisconsin River runs like a bandolier across Wisconsin, as the Illinois River runs across Illinois. They both empty into the Mississippi River. So there's a lot of things along the river, but it's subject to floods, so you
yeah,
don't have any big buildings on them.
I see.
A lot
But
of
yeah,
cottages.
I remember when I was a kid, Wisconsin Dells was like a good place to go. That was close and easy. Uh, but I had never heard of Birchwood Lake, and so that was kind of like a smaller version with the fishing business that they had. Was a smaller version of Wisconsin Dells.
Well, in those days, it was like the wilderness. There was very little, I mean, there's a lot of woods, the North Woods in Wisconsin, poor soil, sandy soil, not very good farming, but it was great for resorts. And people in the summertime, before air conditioning, would go up into northern Wisconsin to a resort. And so that's why they had their fishing resort. And it was cooler up there. And Uncle Clarence was a good storyteller and fisherman, and he would tell fish stories to the people. And even when they didn't catch fish, they had a good time because he entertained them. And so he didn't work very hard. He was he was an auto mechanic. He could fix anything. He was really smart, good storyteller, but never made a very good living for his family. But he enjoyed being the fishing guide to these people from the city who would come up. Another thing was that the hay fever season would hit in Illinois. It was from pollen would come blow in the air, and that would people that had hay fever couldn't hardly breathe. But if they went up into Wisconsin, this plants that produced the pollen didn't grow up there in the cold northern Wisconsin, and so they could escape during hay fever season. Was another reason to go up there.
Well, I remember having really bad hay fever in Illinois. Did you as well?
Well, I had asthma as a kid, really bad, and it was worse when I was a baby. And then by the time I was 16, it pretty much disappeared. I just read a book by about Teddy Roosevelt, and he had asthma when he was a child, very severe asthma. And when he went away to college, it almost disappeared. He had it all his life, but the attacks were further apart and less severe. When he got to college, he went to Harvard, and he was away from his family. So there's one theory that the asthma is psychosomatic, and that when he got out of his home, which the author says was a wonderful, loving home, and he just had the most wonderful parents that you would want, then he says that, but the attacks disappeared when he got away from them. So I don't know. And I'm not, he has no proof that asthma is psychosomatic or that it's caused by your parents. And I don't want to blame my parents for it, but it was a handicap. That's why I wasn't an athlete, or a lot of things I didn't do because of the asthma attacks or the potential to have one.
So you mentioned that up in Wisconsin, the Standing Rock stories at Devil Lake, and your uncle was a good storyteller in your life. Were there any other good storytellers in your life?
Well, later on, when I was teaching at Larkin High School, a good friend, Jim Dean, grew up in northern Wisconsin. Not too far from Birchwood, at St. Germain. And his parents lived off the land. His father never earned more than about $1,000 a year. And he raised 4 children, and they all went to college. And so he was a Pop Dean, we called him. His last name he was the father of Jim, but we all called him Pop Dean, and he could tell stories. fishing. He was a fishing guide, and the Speaker of the House of Representatives, his name was Halleck, would come up to his lodge, and he'd take Halleck out, and if they didn't catch any fish, they didn't care. They just listen to drink whiskey and around the campfire and listen to Pop Dean spin tales of what it was like. So you're never sure whether they were true or not. But during the Depression up there, they had no way to make a living. And Jim is so angry with his father and all the relatives that they took New Deal money to survive. They wouldn't have survived without the money that the New Deal got to them. And yet they all vote Republican because they believe you should be self-sufficient and not be be dependent on the government. They hated being a dependent, and so
wow, that sounds like that. Not many things have changed.
No. I think that in the rural areas they still vote Republican, and in the cities they vote Democratic.
Now, you were telling, you've told a couple of stories about Jim Dean and going up into Wisconsin, and you'd say that in the spring you'd go up and get flounders and just wade out into the water, and you'd have these big nets that you would just kind of scoop them right out of the water and just let them flop on the bank.
That's right.
Yeah.
Jim Dean, he was an English teacher, and I taught social studies, and he would invite people to go with him, a carload of teachers, and several times I got to go. And we'd go up the first day of fishing season when it opened in the spring, and we taught all year, and we needed a break really bad from teaching. we all liked teaching, but we thought we needed a break. So we'd go up to his place, which is kind of like a fishing lodge, although the fishermen did not live with the Deans, but they would hire him. And we'd go up there, and Jim, of course, grew up with catching these fish that came up the streams like salmon from the lake to spawn. And they weren't salmon by any means. They were junk fish. What are they? Carp. Yeah, carp.
Carp. Yeah, you said flounder, I think, when I was a kid. That's the way I remember it anyway. Yeah.
These fish are not good eating normally. I mean, most people don't.
Yeah.
And they were coming up the stream, and the ice had just melted in these streams, and we were in ice cold water, and you'd stand there, and we thought this is some kind of snipe hunt the first time when Jim would jump into the water, and he said, now you jump into the water and you hold the net right here, and that we'd say, come on, Jim, you're pulling our leg. No, he says, watch, and he jumped, grabbed these great big carp. They were, they'd be like more than a foot long, and weighed 10 pounds maybe. And he'd throw them up on the shore. And then we'd all jump in the water, and then we were throwing fish and when we got a gunny sack full, we'd take them back, and Jim's mother would clean fish. She charged for that. Was a way she had of making money. She'd clean the fishermen's fish, and then she would freeze them in her freezer. And then when they were ready to go home, they could have frozen fresh fish. Of course, they didn't bring carp home. They wouldn't think of that, but she would get paid to do that. So she'd clean these carp, and then we would put them on a grate over a 55-gallon oil drum that the bottom and top was gone, and then Pop would take special wood, I think it was hickory, that had to be make a fire, and he would smoke these fish at the top of the drum with a big wash tub over the top of them. And when they were done, and he pulled the wash tub away, we would all sit around a campfire and drink beer and eat those carp that were smoked. And to us, they tasted like salmon. And it would soften the bones even of these carp had very kind of soft bones. So you could eat them, bones and all, kind of like salmon and many, but most people thought they were junk fish. And
Uh-huh.
we, Pop Dean knew all kinds of things about the woods that people didn't know, that you could eat carp. And we enjoyed that very much. It was a fun time.
Yeah, well, I remember it down in Elgin, where we used to live, Fox River. The carp that they had there were not very good because they were, it was all muddy and warm and everything. But
Yeah.
way up in Wisconsin, with the fresh water and the clear water, and I would imagine that it would be much better.
Yeah, that's what Jim said. It had to be cold water and clean, fresh water, and only at that time of year were they edible.
Yeah.
And later on in the summer, when the fishermen arrived, if they caught one by accident, they'd throw it. They didn't even throw it back in the water. They threw it up on the bank because they didn't want them to reproduce in the lake. They wanted muskie and
Oh, right.
northern pike and walleye and things like that to catch.
Uh-huh.
So they'd be angry if they caught a carp. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Well, great. It's been about 30 minutes, so I think this would be a good time to close it down for today.
Okay.
And
okay,
we
great.
can, yeah. Thanks
Now,
for
this
all
is
your
fun.
stories. Yeah, I really appreciate it. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna finish recording here.
Okay, good.